Hey there, gardening friends. Ever wondered which method reigns supreme when it comes to growing your own veggies? Well, in this video, we are embarking on a fascinating experiment to compare container gardening and raised bed gardening. Get ready to discover the unexpected results that could change the way that you garden. Patrina here with Homegrown Florida. I was debating about whether to even actually do this video or not, because honestly, this experiment kind of surprised me. I expected it to go one way and it went a whole different way. I even wrote an outline for this video long before I even put the tomato into the soil because I just knew it would turn out the way that I thought. Well, needless to say, I scrapped that outline and wrote an entire new one. Before we get into that, let's talk about how we set up both the container garden and the raised bed. I started with 2 tomato plants. They were the Homestead 24 variety. I wanted them to have the best start, so I started them in my arrow garden and then transplanted them into 5-inch pots. I love starting tomatoes in my arrow garden because I feel like it just gives them the most perfect environment to get strong and healthy before I put them out into our crazy Florida weather. I have a video that I'll link down into the description below that shows exactly how I do this. I started these plants the same time in late January with the same exact seeds, same growing medium, and then I transplanted them into smaller pots with the exact same soil. I waited until late February when I was absolutely sure we were past the possibility of frost before I transplanted them, one into my raised bed and one into this larger container. This is where things change because the soil is different and the watering is different. So the soil in my raised beds were started from composted wood mulch, sticks, leaves, grass clippings, food scraps, and then topped with a good quality compost. Then over the years, I added things like sand, homemade compost, lots of organic materials such as grass clippings and leaf litter as a mulch. I also add some organic fertilizer to the whole bed at the start of the spring season. There is a ton of super healthy soil life occurring underground in these beds. I can't dig down without running into very fat, very active earthworms, which screams to me that good things are happening down there. Now the container was filled with a high quality organic soil mix out of a bag. I did pick a really good quality one that had good nutrients in it. With both of them, I added tomato tone fertilizer into the hole where I was going to plant the tomato plants. And I did my very best to plant each one as deeply as I could. The water was also a bit different. My raised beds are watered automatically from my well water in the early morning twice a week, while the container was watered from my rainwater barrel kind of in the late morning when I wake up. Starting at twice a week, but then a couple weeks into it, we had to increase it to just about every other day. Now let's deep dive into the reel. Here are our 2 tomato plants. So this guy right here and this one right here. They look pretty different, huh? At least I think they do. I think the most obvious difference right now is the size of the plants, but there are a lot more differences. So let me bring you in close so that you can see each one. The raised bed plant is very green, bushy, with a ton of tomatoes. I had it supported with the Florida weave and that wasn't really holding up anymore. So I actually made the decision not too long ago to top these tomato plants and I trimmed a lot of the leaves off. So this plant was much taller than what it is now. I was kind of hoping that this would make them easier for the weave to hold up, but as you can see, they're really starting to have a hard time holding these very heavy plants up. Besides the size, this plant has produced a lot of tomatoes, which I have been pulling off for at least 2 to 3 weeks now. The tomatoes are pretty big and shaped really well. I did have some bug damage on the fruits from an armyworm that took some time to get under control. Another thing I noticed about this plant is that up until this week, the plant has been flowering, which really surprised me because here in Florida, tomato plants start dropping their flowers if the temperature gets above 90 degrees. So this tells me that the raised bed is insulating the plant roots so that they stay cooler longer, hence allowing the flowers to form longer. Now the container plant has had a little bit of a different experience. It has kind of some spindly growth. It's pretty short in comparison, and the leaves are not a super green color. It has only produced these 3 tomatoes on the whole plant. The fruit is much, much smaller than the other plant, and it took a lot longer to ripen. This plant struggled with nutrients, but it never struggled with bugs. I did not find one single bug on this whole plant this whole time. So that's definitely an interesting takeaway. The flowers on this plant have stopped now for quite some time. I think this might be why the plant produced so few tomatoes than the one in the raised bed. If you're finding this comparison video interesting, make sure to give me a big thumbs up down below. Another big difference that I noticed is the fertilizer needs. I only top dressed the raised bed once about halfway through the season. I tried to do the same with the container, but it was having some significant nutrient issues, which you can see from the veining and the coloring of the leaves. Once I started seeing this, I started adding fish fertilizer weekly, and it is getting better, but it's still not super healthy. Here is what I think happened. First, the soil in the container is the bag stuff, so it's not soil I've been building for years. The bag stuff works, but it just doesn't have everything the plant needs, especially a hungry tomato plant. I think if I were to switch to a synthetic fertilizer or started using homemade compost in my containers, that might solve my nutrient issue pretty quickly. The next big thing I noticed was that the container dries out way more quickly than like a raised bed, so I had to water it a lot more often. I basically was watering it every other day at this point, and it still seems thirsty to me. Because of all this water, I think the nutrients keep washing out faster, causing an even bigger nutrient issues. I keep having to add more and more fertilizer, top dressing it, and water soluble fish fertilizer. I mean, I'm feeding the heck out of this thing, and it just doesn't seem to respond. Next, the container is dark in color, which attracts heat. So I think it's heating up the plant's roots faster, which caused the flowers to drop sooner than I anticipated and experienced like in the past. Also, this dark container probably causes the soil to dry out even faster. I think this is what really leads to a lot less productivity and an overall unhealthy plant with the container tomato. So if you base this experiment solely on this outcome, the raised bed does win. But I am not a proponent of just growing in raised beds. I would never say that, guys. I grow lots of things in containers, in ground. I think there is a place for all growing methods in all of our gardens, depending on your space, your type of plants, and your goals for your garden. I think containers are great. They are my #1 recommendation, guys. #1 for brand new gardeners because they are accessible, they're easy to use, and they're easy to find, regardless of your yard size. They are the fastest and easiest way to start a garden. Anything to get your garden journey started faster is a good idea to me, but I think this experiment taught me a lot about better ways to grow in containers. Things like building healthy soil doesn't need to just be for the raised bed. Making homemade compost and using leaves and grass clipping as mulch are great ways to build soil in containers rather than just using the bagged soil. In my mind, I just had this idea that you can't build soil in containers, but really a raised bed is just a really big container. So this was a big takeaway for me. Another thing I learned is the bigger the container, the better. Even if recommendations are to use a smaller container, you really can't go wrong with larger. This is a pretty big container, and I would definitely have doubled this. The more soil, the more room for the roots have to expand and grow larger. Giving it a lot of space to grow is only going to help the whole plant do better. I think those really large grow bags, they're like a canvas grow bag, would be really good choices for this because they're inexpensive. They have great drainage and they're really breathable fabric. I would maybe even switch to a light colored or slightly insulated container to help reduce the heat on these pots. I didn't really appreciate how much the dark color absorbs and traps heat, which negatively impacts the health of the roots of the plants, especially in a warm climate like here in Florida. This may not be a big concern for you if you live in a cooler climate, but if you are in a warm climate, this could be a game changer. When I first started this video, I told you I was surprised about the results of this experiment because I really did expect them to grow the same. I didn't even think I would notice a difference between the two plants, but that's not what happened. So now, after this interesting comparison, what's the verdict? Well, I think it all depends on your gardening goals. Container gardening is perfect for urban dwellers, beginner gardeners, or those with limited space. It offers convenience and more manageable plant growth. On the other hand, raised beds provide a larger growing area, better root development, and potentials for higher yields. Considering your specific needs, available space, and gardening preferences to decide which method works for you. Whichever one you choose, I just know that growing your own food, regardless of how you're doing it, is such a rewarding experience. It can improve your eating habits, provide physical activity, engage your mind, and improve your overall mental health. All of these things lead to a more happy and healthy life. If you have been container gardening, I would love it if you could head down in the comments and leave some of your tips or tricks to successfully grow more food in containers. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you want to watch a couple more of my videos, I'm going to pop them up right here. You can check those out between now and my next upload. Happy gardening, guys!